our topic today is business-led solutions to revitalizing Chicago communities. Let's ask a really fundamental question of each of our very different panelists, and that is, why do we care? Why all this incredible effort to focus on revitalizing communities? We've got Oz right here outside the window. Why are we so focused on revitalizing communities? So Mike, tell us a little bit about what your motivation is in the counties.
Sure, and Jacques just touched on it as well. I mean, companies have a duty to shareholders, but they also have a responsibility to stakeholders. And your company is not going to succeed unless you're aware of the community around you. Your employees are also customers. They're your consumers. You have to understand the community in which you're moving into and which you want to do business with. And probably the best way to do that is to become fully integrated and enmeshed in your community. And we've heard from these wonderful young people earlier today who talked about the experiences and the opportunities they've had. So many of you here today are creating those mentorship opportunities, those internship opportunities, seeing to it so when a young person walks in front of a bank that they can go in beyond the guard, beyond that lobby, and go backstage so they can visualize the jobs that they're in school to have, why they should stay in math, why they should focus on their STEM program, why they should do their homework, and remain engaged in school. Because once they can visualize that opportunity, it gives them every reason to stay focused. And they've got so many outside influences which may not be positive for them, and if the business community can create those opportunities, they're going to create their next round of employees, managers, officers, directors, and ultimately customers as well.
And JP, you mentioned that this idea of Shinola started in Texas. Why Detroit? What made you guys care enough that you went to Detroit, of all places?
Well, it's our mission, right? Our mission is to create jobs in the United States. And let me be very clear about something, because we get attacked a lot. We're not saving Detroit. We're definitely not going to save the south side of Chicago. But we know a few things, and I touched on those things during the introduction, right? I think one thing is humanity. The private sector needs to step up at some level and take responsibility for our communities. We profit off of our communities. We thrive in our communities. The workforce comes from our communities. And if we don't support those communities and give back to those communities, what do we have at the end of the day? I would say this as well. I know a few case studies. There's one in particular in Detroit that's pretty fascinating. A company called the Ideal Group that was started by a guy called Frank Venegas. And Frank was approached when he got out of jail. He was a gangbanger. He was approached by other gang leaders in Mexico Town in Detroit, and they wanted to work, and they wanted an opportunity. And Frank said, well, let me think through this. And he eventually started the Ideal Group, and today employs several hundred people in Mexico Town. And the violence in Mexico Town in Detroit has subsided drastically. There's basically no more violence there. So we know that job creation, for example, saves lives. So what can we do in our communities from a private sector point of view to save some lives? Just by creating jobs. How hard is that, really? It's actually pretty damn hard, but we're up for the task. And I think that we collectively in this room, as leaders, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, et cetera, can do that and can save lives. And the implications are real. And I think, look, it's our responsibility as people to care for one another, to begin to think about inclusion in a bigger, more important way, to have hard conversations, right? I was with Jeff last night at dinner, who's sitting over there in the corner. Jeff is an amazing businessman and guy who's working in communities here through the Boy Scouts of America. To have hard conversations about racism, to have hard conversations about inclusion. And we as the private sector have to begin to do that and take on those roles to have this discussion with many, many people, broad section of the communities that we operate in. So I think that it comes down to a humanity thing at the end of the day for us. And job creation is what is at the core of what we do at Shinola.
That's great, thank you. And Gloria, you've got some of Chicago's most large corporations, marquee corporations that are behind what you're doing at Chicago United. Why did they come to you to do what they do to help drive this inclusiveness?
Well, you know, actually, it's interesting because Chicago United is a unique standalone organization. There's not another one like it in the country. And we were founded following Dr. King's assassination with 13 CEOs who came together and said, if we're all going to work and live here, we have to be responsible for creating change. And that's been the model of Chicago United for the 50 years. And we continue with that because I think really aware CEOs understand that, in fact, we are part of an ecosystem. We are all part of it. And so they continue to be committed to making sure that this is a great place to work and live. And so I've been really proud to launch a number of initiatives with these CEOs in the areas of talent development and in the areas of minority business development. And it's interesting, Jacques, that you mentioned the Ideal Group, because that's a great example of a company that has grown because there was a strategic partnership in the auto industry to grow with the Ideal Group. And they were given a lot of opportunities. They lived up to those opportunities. They created jobs. They created a safe zone to work in Detroit. And that's part of what we've been doing in Chicago through our 5 Forward initiative, creating these strategic relationships between large corporations and minority-owned businesses that can grow to scale and create jobs. And we know that that's a proven mechanism, and that's kind of why the CEOs come to Chicago United, is because we want to think systemically about creating change. It's wonderful to change one life at a time, and we do that, but we also need to think systemically about where are the barriers? How do we address those barriers? How do we have the courageous conversations that allow us to actually see the barriers and then get through them? And that's partially why the CEOs come, is because they've got a safe place to have those conversations and explore. You don't want to do that in a public forum. You want to do that in a place where you can come together and really think about solutions. And sometimes those conversations are rough conversations, but that's how you break through, and that's why the CEOs come to Chicago United.
That's terrific. And continuing with you, Gloria, so you've developed some nice processes. Tell me about some of the engagement strategies that you use to keep these corporations involved, and what do they bring to you that you're learning from them too in terms of their motive for being engaged?
It's a very two-way relationship. So what we provide for the corporations is primary research. We look at Chicago in a way that no one else looks at it. We ask some hard questions. Sometimes we will ask questions, and we have partners like the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago who will lend us an economist, and we get to ask hard questions. Like, if we continue to change the rate of inclusion in the senior level ranks of Chicago, how long will it be if we keep the same rate of inclusion to parity? To when you see people of color in the executive level ranks equal to their representation in the workforce. When we did that the first time in 2008, it was 94 years to parity if we continued with the same practices and progress. We measured it again in 2014, and it had reduced to 64 years. However, that was being driven largely by the increase of Asians in executive level ranks. Latinos and African Americans had pretty much flatlined. So what corporations come to us for is the fact that we look at kind of fact-based advocacy. First we do the research, and then we think about how do we create systemic change. So they bring resources to us, and we have dialogue about what they're doing inside of their corporations. We learn from them. We take that information. We help to create programs and products where they can actually implement change in their own organizations.
That's terrific. And JP, so you're looking at things on the South Side. What can communities on the South Side bring to you to help you be successful with them?
Yeah, I think what communities can bring to us is the feedback and the inputs that we need to be able to go into the communities in a way that is respectful, in a way that is transparent, in a way that is real. Again, we're not saving the South Side of Chicago, but you can imagine I've been called everything from a neoliberal to the big white evil machine of Detroit that's ruining the city of Detroit. I don't know what a neoliberal is, or I didn't until I was called one. And I can assure you that we're not the big white evil machine coming in to save Detroit. And so we have to have inputs from the community, right? And the community letting us know how to operate within their boundaries, how to be part of the community in a again, a real way. And so when we go into these communities, we go into the community with you know, a very delicate footstep, leaving behind a very peaceful path for others to follow in, because we want to set an example. You know, in the south side of Chicago, we might create 20, 30 jobs in the beginning. It's not much, but what does it imply and what does it show or exemplify for others to come behind? We have got to go into these neighborhoods and these communities in ways that aren't obtrusive, in ways that don't damage relationships and create more tension between us, between the private sector and the community, or the nonprofit, or the government. We have to be extremely conscious of this is not my neighborhood, it's your neighborhood, and how can I operate professionally and proficiently in your area. So for us, it's about taking the data inputs and applying them to how we expand into these different communities.
I think that's critically important because the communities really, they know better than somebody from the outside coming in. I think most of us have experienced that. Mike, you wear an interesting and unique hat here as an elected official. You have a large district, if you will, compared to, say, an alderman, but two things here. You talked about stakeholders, and the electeds are one of the many stakeholders, but also this notion that JP's talking about in terms of the delicacy in working with those who know. Tell us how electeds view a Chicago United or a Shinola in terms of you know, how should they engage with an elected, how should an elected engage with them, but then also, you know, how do we foster more of this so that these neighborhoods do have more Shinolas willing to step up to the plate?
That's a great question. Seeing everybody as a partner, not being proprietary about opportunities, not being proprietary and secretive about intelligence or ideas or success stories.
That's hard, you know.
Scaling that up, yes. Believe it or not, some electeds have big egos and don't want to share those things. But those big egos. So for example, there's something called incentive classes, and I won't get all wonky about it, but an incentive class is a development tool that says if you're willing to go into an affected community, create a certain number of jobs, and reclaim an abandoned or underused property, your property taxes for up to 12 years will be below market. Clover Hill Bakery on the west side of Chicago, commercial bakery, actually outgrew its physical plant and needed a larger distribution center, but it was landlocked and it couldn't grow. They got an incentive class. The city and the county partnered with the village of Cicero to move outside of the city across the border into Cicero, got an incentive class, and they have a much larger distribution and production facility there. It was great because their employees were already on the west side of the city and they're still keeping in their residences, and as the company has expanded, it's created more employees in Cicero and in the city of Chicago. You would think that the city or Cicero would both hold on to those jobs, but by partnering together, everybody won. More jobs got created, and you know, a building that was not being used in Cicero got to expand, and the main facility in Chicago got to stay put where it was, and everybody won. More people got jobs, more tax rolls came on the rolls. It's a real success story. But that's a good example of everybody pulling in the same direction. And a lot of what Chicago United does is acting as a clearinghouse of opportunities and ideas, so that if you're new to Chicago, it can be a one-stop shop.